I never thought a museum could be terrifying. Strange, maybe, unsettling, sure, but terrifying, no. That was until I spent the longest night of my life locked inside one. It was supposed to be a simple overnight security shift. I'd taken the job at the city's historical museum to make some extra cash. It wasn't my first time working security, but museums were a new environment for me. Quiet, predictable, easy. At least, that's what I believed when I signed up. The museum itself wasn't particularly large or famous, but it housed artifacts spanning centuries of history, ancient tools, preserved letters, paintings, and even a collection of taxidermied animals that always seemed to watch you as you walked past. It was the kind of place kids visited on school trips, snapping pictures of faded exhibits before moving on, bored. But that night, I learned that even the most mundane objects can hold stories far darker than they appear. I started my shift at 10 p.m., armed with a flashlight, a radio, and a set of keys. The place was eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every movement. I made my rounds as usual, walking past the glass cases and reading the plaques out of boredom. It was sometime around midnight when I first noticed something wasn't right. It was in the East Wing, where the museum displayed artifacts from the late 1800s. A mix of clothing, medical instruments, and personal belongings donated from estates. As I passed by one of the displays, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. A pair of wire-framed glasses, the kind you'd expect a schoolteacher to wear a century ago, were sitting on the edge of the glass shelf. But I was sure they hadn't been there before. I had walked past this case twice already that night, and they had always been in the center, neatly arranged. Now, they were at the very edge, as if someone had nudged them forward. My mind immediately tried to rationalize it. Maybe a small vibration from my steps or a shift in air pressure. Museums aren't exactly known for their modern climate control. I took a step forward and tapped the glass case. Nothing moved. The glasses stayed right where they were. I adjusted them back to their original position, shook my head and continued on. But my nerves had been set on edge. I started noticing other things. A small chair in the Victorian-era exhibit seemed slightly turned, facing a different direction than before. A typewriter in another case had a key depressed, as if someone had just pressed it and walked away. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched had started creeping in, subtle but persistent. At around 2 a.m., I was in the taxidermy room, a long, dimly lit gallery filled with preserved animals from various time periods. It was by far the most unsettling part of the museum, not because I believed in anything supernatural, but because there was something deeply unnatural about the way the animals were posed, frozen mid-motion, their glass eyes catching the light in ways that made them seem almost alive. As I walked through, I heard a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffling. I turned quickly, shining my flashlight around, but there was nothing, just rows of lifeless creatures staring back at me. I moved forward slowly, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. That's when I saw it. One of the taxidermy foxes was no longer facing forward. It had turned slightly to the left. My breath caught in my throat. I had been in this room multiple times. I knew the positions of each animal. I backed away, never taking my eyes off it, my heart pounding. Then, the sound came again, this time from the far end of the room. A gentle rustling, like fabric shifting against itself. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I aimed it toward the source. The curtain that covered a storage doorway was moving. Not wildly, not with force, but just enough to let me know something or someone was behind it. I had a decision to make. Call for backup, leave the building, or face whatever was there. My job, my pride, and my own stubbornness forced me to stay. I stepped forward, gripping my flashlight like a weapon, and pulled the curtain aside. The storage room was empty. Completely empty. The only exit was a locked door I had the key to, and nothing had been disturbed. But the hairs on my arms were standing straight up. Something had been there. I was sure of it. The rest of the night was a slow descent into paranoia. Every creak of the old wooden floors, every faint whisper of shifting air, sent adrenaline surging through my veins. I stayed near the security monitors for the last hour of my shift, watching the feeds obsessively, waiting for something, anything, to move. Nothing did. When the morning crew arrived, I practically ran out of the building. I never told my boss what happened. Who would believe me? It wasn't ghosts, it wasn't demons. But something in that museum was wrong, and I wasn't going to be the one to figure out what. I quit a week later, moved to a different job, and never looked back. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I think about that fox, about how it had turned ever so slightly in my direction, and I wonder, was it always watching, waiting for someone to notice? Or was it simply the first thing to make its move? It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I decided to visit the Museum of Antiquities. I'd always been drawn to places that held the weight of history, where the air seemed to hum with the whispers of the past. The museum was an old, imposing building, its stone facade weathered by time, standing like a silent sentinel at the edge of the city. I'd heard rumors about its collection, artifacts from forgotten civilizations, relics that carried with them stories of tragedy and triumph. But what I didn't know was that some stories are better left untold, and some doors are better left unopened. The moment I stepped inside, I was struck by the stillness. The air was cool, almost unnaturally so, and the faint scent of aged wood and dust filled my nostrils. The museum was nearly empty, save for a few scattered visitors who moved through the exhibits like shadows. I wandered aimlessly at first, my footsteps echoing softly against the marble floors. It wasn't until I reached the lower level that I felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The sign above the doorway read, "Restricted access, staff only," but the door was slightly ajar, and curiosity got the better of me. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb overhead. The walls were lined with shelves, each one crammed with artifacts that seemed to have been forgotten by time. There were no labels, no descriptions, just objects that seemed to carry an air of unease. My eyes were drawn to a small, ornate box sitting on a table in the center of the room. It was intricately carved, the wood dark and polished, with symbols etched into its surface that I didn't recognize. Something about it called to me, and before I could think better of it, I reached out and opened it. Inside was a mask. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, smooth and pale, with hollow eyes and a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It looked ancient, yet it was perfectly preserved, as if it had been crafted yesterday. I felt a strange compulsion to touch it, to hold it in my hands. The moment my fingers brushed against its surface, a chill ran through me, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. I quickly closed the box and stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the eerie atmosphere of the room was playing tricks on me. But deep down I knew something was wrong. I left the room quickly, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. I wandered through the rest of the museum, but my mind kept drifting back to the mask. It was as if it had imprinted itself on my memory, its hollow eyes following me wherever I went. I tried to focus on the other exhibits, but they all seemed dull and lifeless in comparison. By the time I left the museum, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. I told myself I would forget about the mask, that it was just a strange artifact in a forgotten room. But that night I had the first dream. It started with the mask. In the dream I was standing in the same dimly lit room, the box open in front of me. The mask seemed to glow faintly, its pale surface almost luminous in the darkness. I reached out to touch it, and this time I couldn't stop myself. As soon as my fingers made contact, the room began to change. The walls seemed to dissolve, and I was no longer in the museum. I was in a place I didn't recognize, a vast empty landscape, the sky a deep, oppressive red. The mask was still in my hands, but now it felt heavier, as if it were alive. I tried to drop it, but it clung to me, its surface growing warmer and warmer until it felt like it was burning my skin. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the image of the mask seared into my mind. The dreams didn't stop. Night after night, I found myself back in that strange, desolate landscape, the mask in my hands. Each time the experience was more vivid, more intense. I began to notice details: the cracked, dry earth beneath my feet, the faint sound of whispers carried on the wind, and always the mask. It was as if it were trying to tell me something, to show me something, but I couldn't understand what it was. I started to dread going to sleep, knowing that the moment I closed my eyes, I would be pulled back into that nightmare. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was just stress, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The mask had done something to me, something I couldn't explain. I began to notice changes in myself, small at first, but growing more pronounced. I would catch myself staring at my reflection in the mirror, my face seeming unfamiliar, almost alien. My thoughts became darker, more fragmented, as if something were trying to take control of my mind. I started to feel like I was losing myself, like the person I had been was slowly slipping away. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, haunted by the mask and the dreams it brought. I decided to go back to the museum, to confront whatever it was that had taken hold of me. When I arrived, the building was closed, the doors locked, but I couldn't wait. I found a side entrance and slipped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The museum was dark, the only light coming from the streetlights outside. I made my way to the lower level, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The door to the restricted room was still ajar, just as I had left it. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I remembered it, the shelves lined with forgotten artifacts, the flickering bulb overhead. The box was still on the table, the mask inside. I approached it slowly, my hands trembling. I knew I had to destroy it, to break whatever hold it had over me. I picked up the box and opened it, the mask's hollow eyes staring up at me. I took a deep breath and reached inside, my fingers closing around it. The moment I touched it, the room seemed to shift, the walls dissolving just as they had in my dreams. I was back in that desolate landscape, the mask in my hands. But this time, it was different. The whispers were louder, more insistent, and I could feel the mask's presence in my mind pressing against my thoughts. I tried to resist, to fight it, but it was too strong. It was as if the mask were alive, its consciousness merging with mine. I could feel its memories, its desires flooding into me. And then I understood. The mask wasn't just an artifact. It was a vessel, a prison for something ancient and malevolent. It had been waiting, biding its time, until someone foolish enough to open the box came along. And now it had found me. I don't know how long I stood there, the mask's presence overwhelming me. But eventually, I managed to pull myself free, to break the connection. I dropped the mask and stumbled back, my mind reeling. I knew I had to destroy it to make sure it could never harm anyone else. I looked around for something, anything that I could use. My eyes fell on a heavy stone statue on one of the shelves. I grabbed it and brought it down on the mask with all my strength. The sound of the impact echoed through the room, and for a moment I thought it hadn't worked. But then I saw the cracks, tiny at first but spreading quickly across the mask's surface. And then it shattered. The moment it did, the room seemed to come alive. The air grew warmer, the oppressive stillness lifting. I felt a sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But I knew it wasn't over. The mask was gone, but its influence had left a mark on me. I could still feel it, lingering in the corners of my mind, a shadow that would never fully go away. I left the museum that night, the shattered remains of the mask left behind. I told myself I would never go back, that I would try to forget what had happened. But I knew that some things can't be forgotten, no matter how hard you try. The dreams stopped after that, but the memories remained. I still see the mask sometimes in the corners of my vision, its hollow eyes staring at me. I don't know if it's real or just my mind playing tricks on me. But I do know this. Some doors should never be opened, and some stories should never be told. The mask was a reminder of that, a warning from the past, And now, I'm passing that warning on to you. Be careful what you seek out, what you touch, because you never know what might be waiting for you just beyond the edge of the light. I never should have taken that job at the City Museum's photography archives. The position seemed perfect, organizing and digitizing their collection of historical photographs, working alone in the basement where I could focus without interruption. My predecessor had left suddenly, citing health reasons, but that didn't raise any red flags at the time. I understand now why she couldn't stay. The first few weeks were exactly what I expected. I spent my days carefully scanning century-old photographs, documenting the city's evolution through thousands of black and white images. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Each photograph told its own story. Construction sites becoming familiar buildings, horse-drawn carriages giving way to automobiles, faces frozen in time looking back at me through the years. It started with a single photograph from 1893. At first glance, it was unremarkable, just another street scene showing the old market square. But as I prepared to scan it, something caught my eye. In the background, partially obscured by a horse cart, was a figure that seemed wrong somehow. The image was slightly blurred, common for photographs of that era, but this figure appeared to be in perfect focus. While everyone else in the photo was going about their business, this person was staring directly at the camera. Their features were sharp, modern, out of place in the Victorian setting. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a quirk of the developing process. But then I found another photograph, this one from 1912. Different location, different photographer, but there in the crowd was the same figure. Same clothes, same pose, same unsettling direct stare. The rational part of my mind tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but my hands were shaking as I kept searching through the archives. 1927, 1945, 1961, 1978, 1989. Different decades, different contexts, but the same figure appeared in the background of seemingly random photographs. Never the subject, always a bystander, always staring at the camera as if they knew I would be looking. The clothing never changed, the face never aged. In every image they stood slightly apart from the crowd, like an observer rather than a participant. I became obsessed with tracking down information about these photographs. I spent hours after work researching the photographers, the locations, trying to find any connection. Most of the photographers were long dead, their studios closed, their records lost to time. The few still living had no memory of the figure in their photographs. One elderly photographer became agitated when I asked, insisting he had never seen that person despite their clear presence in his work. The museum's research databases offered no answers, but I discovered something disturbing. Every photographer who had captured this figure in their work had experienced a similar fate. Within months of taking the photograph, they began to report feeling watched. Their other photographs would develop with inexplicable dark spots. Their equipment would malfunction, and eventually they would abandon photography altogether. Some moved away, others suffered nervous breakdowns. A few simply disappeared, leaving behind studios full of damaged photographs and destroyed equipment. My own work started to show signs of interference. Digital scans would become corrupted, showing only that figure's face regardless of the original image. Photographs I had carefully organized would be found scattered across the floor in the morning, despite the archives being securely locked. The figure began appearing in the backgrounds of my test scans, photographs I had taken myself of empty rooms. The security cameras in the archive room started malfunctioning, showing hours of static, interrupted by brief glimpses of someone standing in the corner, watching me work. The guards checked every time I reported it, but they never found anyone. They started giving me concerned looks, suggesting maybe I was working too hard, spending too much time alone in the basement. Last week, I found a photograph I know wasn't there before. It was on my desk, mixed in with the 19th century prints I was scanning. The paper was old, yellowed, but the image was clear. It showed me sitting at my desk in the archives from behind. The figure was standing in the doorway, closer than in any other photograph I'd found. When I turned around, the doorway was empty, but I could feel someone watching. I tried to quit yesterday. The museum director listened patiently to my hastily invented excuse about family obligations, but his response chilled me to the bone. He explained that my position was too important to leave unfilled, that my work needed to be completed. His words seemed rehearsed, as if he'd had this conversation before. As he spoke, I noticed a photograph on his wall I hadn't seen in my previous visits to his office. It showed the museum's opening day in 1891. There, standing among the crowd, was the figure, and next to them, wearing the same clothes I wore yesterday, was my predecessor. The woman who had fled this job looked exactly like me. I'm writing this now from my desk in the archives. The lights keep flickering and I can hear footsteps in the stacks behind me, even though I know the door is locked and I'm alone down here. The photographs on my desk are changing. Every image, regardless of its original subject, now shows the same scene. A figure standing in a doorway, watching someone work at a desk. The person at the desk is always turned away, but I know it's me. The figure is getting closer in each image. My hands are trembling as I write this. The scanner has been running continuously for the past hour, spitting out photograph after photograph. Not the historical images I'm supposed to be archiving, but new ones. They show me at different angles, all taken moments ago, though I'm alone in this room. In each one, the figure is closer. I can see its features more clearly now. The face is hollow, almost translucent, like an overexposed photograph. But the eyes are sharp and dark, holding the deep blackness of a camera lens. I tried calling security, but the line is dead. My cell phone only shows an error message. Camera unavailable. The screen keeps flashing random photographs from the archive, all showing the figure, all taken in this room over the past century. I recognize the people in them now. Every archivist who's worked here, each one captured in their final moments at that desk. My desk. The photographs are changing faster now. The figure's image is becoming clearer, more solid, while everything else, the room, the other people, even my own reflection in the computer screen, is fading, like old photographs left in the sun. I understand now. This thing, whatever it is, doesn't just appear in photographs, it consumes them, consumes us. We're all just images to it, moments to be captured and collected. The last photograph just emerged from the scanner. It shows an empty desk, papers scattered across its surface, a chair pushed back as if someone left in a hurry. My coffee mug is still there, half full, but I'm still sitting here. I'm still writing. Yet somehow, I know this photograph is being taken right now. I think I finally understand what happened to all those photographers, all those archivists. We didn't just document history, we became part of it. Part of this endless collection of moments frozen in time, watched forever by those hollow eyes. The figure isn't getting closer. I am becoming the figure. My skin feels like paper now, thin and fragile. The world around me is flattening, becoming two-dimensional. Through the viewfinder of my dissolving reality, I can see the next archivist who will sit at this desk. They don't know it yet, but I'll be watching them. We'll all be watching, because that's what photographs do. They capture us forever,